Good morning. Thank you for starting your day with me. I was told I should speak super loud because not everybody's had their coffee yet, but hopefully I've got enough content that'll keep you excited. I'm interested in his talk too, the behind the scenes. I've been learning that over my last 6 months. I've been at AWS about that long. Responsible for all of our Kubernetes efforts. Really excited to kind of take you through a little bit of what we're up to, where things stand, and what we're looking at doing next. So let's get right into it. I think the best way to start, because we are very customer obsessed, we spend all of our time talking to, thinking about, and solving problems for customers. So I thought the best place to start is a quick update on our customers. Where are we with our customers? What are the things we're hearing from them? Who are our customers? And I think the who is really interesting for us. So in general, anybody in any vertical probably is or could be one of our customers. The verticals we span: retail, this is everything from customer analytics in the back end to point of sale at the front end. On the finance side, banking, investment institutions, again, a lot of analytics activity for doing trade analytics, future trading analytics, as well as just direct transactions processing. In the gaming industry, where latency these days is super important and getting as close to last mile latency as you can to drive gaming, we see a lot of success in the gaming industry. This is driven in part because of the geographic distribution that AWS is able to provide customers. Healthcare, with incredibly important compliance and privacy protections, also another area that we're seeing a lot of success. Hospitality, we're all mostly not local, so staying in hotels, those industries, and some of their loyalty programs and tracking programs for their customers. In the government sector, again, heavy on compliance, heavy on security. A lot of standardization is starting to take place in the US government in particular around Kubernetes as the method that they want to use to deploy and manage workloads. Transportation industry, and then lastly here, enterprise software is an important one for us. I imagine some of you are partners and not just customers. Enterprise software is where we drive a lot of our partnerships. We recognize that we don't have all of the answers and that going to market with partners is the best way to give customers what they need on the timing that they need it. And so a lot of our effort goes into being open to and working with our partners to make sure that we're delivering the best solutions that we can for our customers. What are those folks building when they actually get a hold of EKS? That's a great question. So one of the standard things is your traditional sort of web apps. Everybody's familiar with them. It's a pretty tried and true method, as well as mobile, which has really had a lot of uptake. I mentioned a couple of times this notion of analytics or data processing, machine learning. It's an incredibly popular workload these days. It's really nice to run in a controlled environment like an EKS cluster or a set of clusters, and we've seen a lot of popularity in this area in particular. It's been on a real upswing for us. The gaming platforms I mentioned, this latency sensitive, this need to get your front end of that gaming platform as close to your customers as possible because it's all about low latency transactions with those customers. Internet of Things, I'll talk in a minute about cameras as a good example of that, webcams, other cameras. And then lastly, and probably one of the biggest areas for us, is really PaaS. It's platform as a service and combined with CI/CD. So in this space, many of our customers actually build platforms on EKS to deliver a set of services across their enterprise. So many times they're trying to deliver a PaaS service that will be back-ended by EKS. They'll have a CI/CD pipeline connected to it, and they're providing that service out to their internal development teams. And that's a pretty common deployment method that we've seen for folks where they want to go build their own platform. They need our help in trying to minimize the amount of sort of undifferentiated heavy lifting, as everyone likes to say, take some of that load off so that they can focus on providing a set of services to their end users, which are typically going to be developers in the enterprise. So one of the things that we hear from our customers is pretty interesting. There are real challenges, especially today with the sort of macroeconomic trends. People are even more concerned about this than they have been in the past. 80% of time is being spent on operations or maintenance of their applications, not on actually doing the interesting work, not on the innovation side. It's only about 20%. So our goal is to really figure out how can we reduce that 80% and increase that 20%, right? Our focus is doing things to offload those components of folks' work. Another way of looking at this, everyone's going digital is the way to think of it. If you look at CEOs, they're under pressure from the board to drive more digital. into their businesses, regardless of what business they're in. You'll see this all the way into the SMB side of businesses these days, where they want that digital presence. They want to be able to drive things through a digital platform and not through old school methods. About 79% of the CIOs think that this is going to make them better prepared for change. And in an environment where change is the new norm and uncertainty is pretty prevalent these days, it's really important to have a strong digital presence, a strong team focused on your digital presence. And then 67% of the business leaders, they believe that they need to pick up this pace. They need to go faster. They need to get more modernized and get their infrastructure in a state where it is able to kind of handle this new rate of change, which is significantly faster than it has been in the past. So if you think about this a little bit, what you realize is the drive on digital is really kind of centered around this idea of an innovation flywheel. If I can very quickly iterate and push something out to a subset, let's say, of our customers, not all of them, push it to a subset of the customers, test the idea, and then change it, because you're almost never right the first time, right? And the reality is we're always not right the first time, and this ability to iterate quickly is what really drives success in the business market. You want to be able to step in, try an idea, and then change it based on what you're seeing from your customers. If you are running things really slow, if you have this really slow rate of change, you can try to do this, but you're so slow to change that you never actually adjust fast enough and you just kind of lose customers' interest. So the key here is this ability to go experiment with an idea, get the feedback, get a new idea to adjust, and then continue that motion. And that's what we're trying to enable for our customers. So what are they doing today? Most of our customers start in some form of monolith. Typically, it's going to be on-prem. They've got a giant application. It's all tied in a single deliverable. And this is the thing they cannot innovate on fast. They cannot get onto a flywheel with this kind of structure. And so they're trying to make changes to adjust this. One of the first changes a lot of folks look at is moving to Kubernetes. We've all heard about it. We're all excited about it. We're all here to learn more about it. This helps you drive consistency, speed of change. Sometimes they'll start on-prem. They'll say, we first want to adopt on-prem. It's going to save time if we get our act together, if you will, and we start looking at microservices and looking at things in a Kubernetes structure before we jump to the next step of moving to the cloud, right? The cloud has tons of opportunity. It allows you to do all kinds of interesting things. It's not an easy first step for a lot of organizations where they're starting at a monolith. There's just a lot of learning, a lot of exercise to do first. And so that first step of Kubernetes, on-prem, smaller sized workloads, then starting to push things into the cloud, starting to take advantage of the benefits of scale, the benefits of geographic distribution, et cetera. Once they get their handle on things, then they start running more clusters. You start seeing an expansion on the sheer volume of clusters, different workloads, different clusters. You start seeing those things appear. Then people start running more significant workloads. Some of those analytics and ML workloads are actually very, very large clusters. So they'll have thousands of nodes in a cluster, all performing a set of analytics tasks. And so you start seeing these bigger clusters that come into play. And then lastly, and sometimes firstly in places like the gaming industry, you start seeing the geographic spread. I want to start placing workloads closer to where I have my data or closer to where my customers are actually living. And you see them running in more places geographically. That's kind of a typical path that we've seen people take. I mentioned the cameras earlier as one of the IoT style of things that our customers are delivering. Nanot's a great example. It's a baby monitoring service. They have cameras, so they're an IoT infrastructure. They're pulling data off and doing analytics on that in the back end in a Kubernetes cluster or set of clusters. I'll let you read the quote, but it's a good example of a digital native app, right? They started in the cloud. They started with EKS. They've been scaling up as their customers have grown. This has allowed them to quickly do their analytics. They can actually spread that into different geographies to be closer to those customers, to run analytics closer to where those babies actually reside, and allows them to serve their customers better. So looking at us and what we focus on, what is it that we think is super important? And I think Ford used to always talk about quality being job one, if you remember those commercials, if you're old enough. We talk about security being job zero. You don't get off the starting line if you're not secure. So one of our big focus areas, and Jyothi's going to talk a little bit about sort of behind the curtains, and as he knows well, our security posture is the most important thing that we provide to our customers. And so that is always at the forefront of our thinking, both in terms of how we design and how we operate our systems at AWS. The second piece here that's also important is built for production. As we're trying to offload tasks you don't want to do yourself, One of the things that we want to ensure is that we are built for scale, that we can help you scale your workloads without you having to go spend a bunch of time thinking about that. That we can provide patches to you in the background to ensure that you're running on the latest variants and have the latest fixes, whether they're security or just the typical bugs that might get in. So we focus a lot on being built for production. It's important to note that we're native, right? So upstream conformant is an important piece of what we deliver, is we are delivering Kubernetes to the customer, and we are not going and embracing extinguishing APIs in the process, right? We want to be supportive of that. If you want to run as direct on Kubernetes, if it's Kubernetes capable, it'll run on us, because we're always going to be native and upstream. Then the second thing here that's also pretty important is around AWS services. So most of our customers really appreciate the open source component I just talked about. They really like that this is an open API, that they recognize it, it's familiar. They have a large contingent of folks who are familiar with Kubernetes and therefore can take advantage of it. Almost all of them also want to take advantage of AWS services in the back end, right? The cloud provides a huge number of very valuable services, and they want access to those services via Kubernetes. And that's a big piece of what we're working to provide more and more of. I suspect you'll hear some more about that later this afternoon. And then committed open source. We are spending a lot of our cycles now focused on contributing back to the community. There's a K in most of the products that we are delivering in the Kubernetes world. The K is Kubernetes. That's part of an overall community that's bigger than just AWS. And so we're continuing to be committed to maintaining and helping that community to be successful, because without it, we wouldn't exist either. So where are we investing our money and our time? Right now, there's three big vectors. One is community. I was just talking about it, right? Supporting the community that is out there in Kubernetes as a world. I talked earlier about our partners. They are part of that community as well. Supporting our partners, making it easier for our partners to deliver solutions to our mutual customers is very important for us. As is technology, contributing back to the community, helping drive community decisions that make Kubernetes better for everyone is a big piece of what we're focusing our time on. And then from a product perspective, that removal of the workloads that you don't want, right? Being able to have a managed service that takes some of these things off the table so you don't have the pressure to deliver a whole bunch of work to get to what you're actually trying to innovate on. And taking that off the table for you is another piece of what we're doing. So what are we doing in supporting open source? There's a few things I thought I would highlight. So one of these is we are just launching an AWS technical community for open source. So some of you may be familiar with TFCs at AWS, these technical field communities. We are creating one dedicated to OSS software. So there's, for example, a containers one. It's about 1,000 people strong, super deep in containers, best practices, how to deploy containers, what you can do to be successful in AWS with containers. We're now extending that out to the open source world. What can I do to deploy open source on AWS? What are some best practices to get it up and running in AWS? What are the best methods to deploy these things and best practices? F2 team, this is F2 is FF, find fix. It's a dedicated group of engineers who are out finding and fixing OSS vulnerabilities upstream. So we have a set of engineers dedicated to going through open source libraries, looking for security vulnerabilities, and then patching those upstream, so that we don't have to wait for some vulnerability to become exploited before we've tried to find it, fix it, and push that upstream to consumers. In the OpenSSF front, we've increased our investment to $10 million over 3 years. This is, again, about security, securing the open source ecosystem. That includes $2.5 million for Alpha Omega, auditing OSS libraries, again, looking for security vulnerabilities. If there's a theme here, it's that people are super nervous about security in the open source world, have been for a while. There's been some very public issues in that space over the years. We're trying to put a lot of attention and focus on ensuring that we have our customers' backs in the security space, and in so doing, are helping the community to be more successful. In the CNCF space, we're on the board. We're a member of the Product Security Committee. We've been doing contributions as well as membership across a number of the different SIGs and increasing that over the last year, and we'll continue to do so. We're working with CNCF to ensure strong long-term viable methods for delivering images out to customers. So a lot of general efforts here in the open source space that we're pretty excited about. We are contributing directly from a code perspective to a whole bunch of different things in this space, and this list is kind of continuously increasing for us. It's a big area of focus, though. We're very excited about doing more development in the open, sharing that with our customers, working directly in some cases with customers on their needs in open source projects, and kind of working together to make that community stronger in the Kubernetes space. I mentioned this before, this upstream compliance, right? That it is still Kubernetes. If it runs on Kubernetes, it will run on Amazon EKS. That is always true. It includes Istio, it includes Knative, Kubeflow, you name it. You can run it if it works in Kubernetes. And it's worth just kind of emphasizing that because sometimes people think it's a product and so it's going to be different. This is why we try to maintain our upstream compliance, is so that you can run what you want to run, whether it's from us or somebody else. There's a lot of somebody else's in this world. If you look at the cloud map, I'm sure everybody's seen this if you've ever been to this conference before. There is no shortage of innovation going on in this space. In fact, there is an absolute ton of different things floating around in the Kubernetes ecosystem. How do you figure out what to use? How do you figure out what to put together? Where do you choose to use it? For what scenarios? So one of the things that we've been working on and rolled out this year is EKS Blueprints. The idea here is it's an open source framework. It's going to let you configure and deploy complete clusters. It'll let you go use infrastructure as code, like Terraform, CDK, builds in best practices. One of the questions we frequently hear is, what do you think we should do? Or how do you think we should deploy something? What's the right way to get this done, right? It's a very, very common question we get. With Blueprints, we can codify that. We can help people get things done in a consistent best practices manner, and we continue to update these with new K8 tools and services as we're able to. They're fully extensible and customizable. You can take down a blueprint, change some of the things up to better suit your own needs or your own policies. But it's a great way to get started, especially if you're looking at something like that cloud map and you have no idea what combination of things you should be thinking about. This one definitely helps. If I look at our portfolio overall, we've really spent a lot of time sort of extending the portfolio. I talk about EKS. EKS is more than just the thing that runs in the cloud. EKS runs in the cloud. It runs on local zones. It runs in wavelength zones. We also have EKS on Outposts for those people who are working where they have their own data center and they want to run EKS in an Amazon Outpost server. We have that ability today. It also runs in what we call anywhere fashion, which is bare metal, VM. You can come and deploy it on your own systems in your data center, and you've got a consistent experience that's provided through AWS, but self-managed. You can run that in an air-gap environment if you choose to, and still have the strength of Amazon behind that offering. And then finally, EKS distro. So the distribution, the way that we've catered to our packaging, we provide so that you can run the same things that we're running internally. Where do we live? In the cloud, Amazon has an amazing distributed geographic network. We updated this slide like 3 times, I think, yesterday, because every time we looked at it, we're like, oh, wait, we added one of these. So continuously evolving. We're constantly adding new regions. We're constantly adding new local zones to get you the lower latency connections. We have a whole bunch of stuff on the slate you can see in the bottom right. Lots of new regions, availability zones, and local zones are on the map coming out soon. So this is a dynamic map for sure, and kind of indicates the value of running in Amazon's cloud as you get this global reach for your business out of the gates. And we're in all of these areas. If I look at infrastructure options for EKS, I touched on this briefly, but I think it's worth just taking a slightly bigger look at this. So we do support VMware vSphere today. If you're going to run EKS anywhere on your own, whatever, Dell server, HP server. We support bare metal, run directly on those servers, and have a deployment method. Apache Cloud Stack just launched very recently. And then we're working with the Snowball team. Snowball is a smaller form factor server device coming from AWS a little bit later, or maybe early next year. And support for that will be built in, as well as working with Nutanix for support for Nutanix. So a whole host of different options coming available, a number of different OS options available as well. And certainly interested in hearing more feedback from folks on this one as folks are trying this out. It's relatively new. It's been out about a year. New today, we're introducing AWS batch support for EKS. I talked about these big workloads, data-intensive workloads. Batch has been a really popular product for that. It didn't have EKS support built in. We've now added that in, so you now have fully managed batch computing on EKS. It is multi-cluster aware. I can now use batch to schedule across multiple EKS clusters to drive those workloads. You have compatibility with existing EKS clusters. Use your preferred monitoring. This is a big step forward for us. Super excited to have this is driven largely by a lot of customer feedback of wanting to be able to run these batch style workloads using batch into EKS clusters. And so we're pretty excited about getting this out the door today. Where are we going to go from here? So I think for us, we continue to focus on the community, both from a contribution and funding perspective, continuing to double down on security because, again, job zero is security. If it's not secure, nobody's going to use it. So we want to continue to help the community to provide secure offerings. On the technology side, additional project leadership, Carpenter being our most recent example of this, where we're driving projects in the open, providing operational best practices, extending EKS blueprints in this space, more global availability, deeper hybrid support for product workloads, continuing our innovations and connections into Amazon products like Batch that we just talked about a moment ago. Whew! Wild list of things that we're working on. We're really excited to hear from customers about these things. We do have folks from the Batch team, as well as obviously a whole bunch of folks from the EKS organization. They'll be at the booth. So if you're interested in those Batch workloads, definitely let us know. Come down, swing by the booth, grab somebody, talk about it. Lots of EKS folks if you want to jump into more detail on any aspects of the EKS side of the system as well. We're happy to talk about that as well. Up next, a little bit of a peek behind the scenes, how we work our workloads at scale. And for that, I'm going to have Jyoti come up. I'll give you that.